Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. New week, new theme. This week we're going to be looking at women of rock, looking at artists or bands with at least one woman in the band itself. Doesn't necessarily have to be a vocalist, but I'm kind of leaning on the fact we're going to get a lot of female led rock bands. I am also hoping that we end up with a lot of rock music, but again, I'm kind of thinking we're going to go in a little different direction. We'll get some heavier stuff, and I think my guess is already going to be verified here with Chelsea Wolfe. I haven't listened to much of hers, but the last time we checked out Chelsea Wolfe, she was with Cult of Luna. Is that what the band was? Doing the Blood Moon. I think it was Blood Moon album. Anyways, I just know Chelsea Wolfe for heavier music, so that's kind of what I'm figuring we're going to get today. So, we are going to check out Chelsea Wolfe's Dragged Out. Let's see what she's bringing to the table today. Dang, that is heavy. So fuzzy, so much weight. Very creepy. Kind of get a Nine Inch Nails vibe out of this. Little haunting ideas over here with the vocals. Just so much noise and weight and layering. It's really interesting how compressed and narrowed it is, but also kind of how wide it feels despite that. Just this one tone over here just really holding itself out. That was interesting. That went right into Nine Inch Nails' Hand That Feeds. Uh, don't know why it crossfaded into that. Anyways, so let's. Man, there is a lot of bonker stuff going on here. And it's all production. Like, if we strip away all of the sonic qualities and see what music is actually written on the page, there's really not a lot going on here. We have a melody that is rather static, um, kind of just sits around a note and rises in pitch, falls in pitch, but it's all like very tightly bound, maybe within half an octave or so at any given time. There are some fringe jumps where we'll come down a bit or hit a higher note, but for the most part, a majority of our lead melody from the vocals is kind of sitting around a very core pocket. When we look at what I think is possibly a guitar doing, once again, it kind of just plays a note, goes up, and goes to the next note, and there's a small chord progression that it follows, but really that's about it. Um, and then we have some atmospheric things, which I don't know would translate to notation as well, but um, like that high pitched sort of just wailing note at the end. Honestly, it's just a really long note on paper. We could probably put some notation in it to provide bends or leaning into sharper, flatter versions of itself, but I mean, otherwise, I really think a lot of that mild variation in the tone rather than just holding out that specific note comes from the production. It's such a key aspect to this track. So yeah, musically, it's just not doing a lot. And I think that if somebody were to create a unplugged version of this song, there would have to be a lot of work given to supplement all of the missing aspect because you're really ripping the heart of the song out by taking away all um, the production, everything that was added on to these core notes that actually got written down. So the production is really what like I said, the heart of this track. It provides the atmosphere, it provides the nuance, it provides the vibe. Um, and it's utilized in a few different ways. One major way is crunch. This is a gritty track, even from the very beginning. Um, the guitars have a ton of fuzz and distortion on them. I'd say the vocals even have a little bit of crunch, though they are rather clean for this style. There is some compression on it for sure, but they're rather distinct against everything else by virtue of being less compressed and distorted than every other voice in here. Um, and this hyper compression, this hyper destruction that's going on with what I believe is guitars, um, is only exacerbated not just by the tone that they are getting through their pedals and amps and cabs and everything, that specific tone they're getting, but I think it's even amplified more in post once it gets into an audio workstation. I'd wager that there's even a little bit more oomph pulled out of it, and a little bit more destruction added to it by the engineer, just because it is ridiculously heavy. There is a massive amount of width to this that I'm sure you could achieve completely with the chain of effects pedals and everything, but I think to just really get this overall weight and width and power, it really is going to take a little bit of engineering to tweak that to be the specific way that it ends up in this track. Interestingly, despite every guitar having this grit on it, this fuzz, this distortion, just really destroying this core sound here, and adding this fuzzy crackle on top of everything. It's not always big. And I tried to figure out exactly what this aspect was, and I'm not quite sure I landed on it during the reaction. If I listen to it again, this is definitely something that I would specifically look for. But I noticed in the verse, there's still the distorted guitars, there's still the vocals. Nothing really changes when we move into the chorus. It's still big and crunchy guitars with these ethereal vocals. But the chorus, I think, is undoubtedly bigger. It's more menacing. It's heavier. And I'm not quite sure what hits that yet. My gut is telling me it has to do with layers. Maybe there's more layers during the chorus, guitar layers specifically, that are going to really lean into this sound. But honestly, I don't know. There could be some widening stuff as well. It just, when the chorus kicks in, the song doubles down on its weight. It becomes so big. And here's the weird thing about this bigness is that I put this style of music in a similar camp to black metal. I really don't know what genre to put this in, and my kind of thing is that with black metal, it's not really a genre I can detail out and really say, this is what makes black metal. To me, it's more of a gut feeling, more so than many other genres where I'm like, it's this kind of production with this kind of composition, and these specific tools show up more often than these other specific tools, right? It's how we differentiate something like rock and roll versus thrash, faster tempos and tremolo picking and faster playing and more aggression. Like we have specific ways of saying, this is a specific type of playing that separates these two genres. I don't have that with black metal. As much as I've listened to it, it's still more of a feeling, and this feels like black metal to me. It also feels like post rock though. Maybe that's what this is though. Maybe this is post rock and not black metal. I do feel like the post rock aspect is a bit more appropriate. Regardless, destruction and weight and uh, just overall sort of wall of sound element is a strong aspect of this production. Really bringing all the instruments together so that you don't really hear them as individual concepts. It's more of the unified element to it. I don't really hear what the guitars are doing separately than the bass or anything like that. It's just sort of this underlying, or in this case, force coming from above that's just pressing down on me sonically. But something else that comes along with this typically is, at least in my experience, audio compression. And I don't mean that in the way that like you put compression on a guitar or vocals and kind of, get a little bit more punch and grit out of them. I mean literally bringing a song or a sound that is so large and just pushing it down into a small area. A lot of these types of songs tend to feel very close, very claustrophobic, and I do get that a little bit with this track. Everything feels very close together. There's very little space between all the instrumentation, which makes sense if you're trying to get that unified sound. But it also just feels like everything is right next to my ears, right next to my face, crushing in around me. Which, of course, is what a lot of post rock does well, and of course, exactly what Chelsea's going for here. But here's the weird thing: it feels compressing, but yet it's also wide. Not a super distinct soundscape where, we would find that instruments can feel both close and distant, something like electronic music with very high fidelity production and varied use of the soundscape, but something that just feels a bit wider than I would expect given the flavor of emotion that they're going for. It's this crushing weight. It wants me to feel trapped. That's what the song is at least telling me. But it's a pressure that's coming in from all sides that is close to me, but yet the guitars on the sides feel a little spacious. And I don't think the guitars are hard panned. I think they have some panning to them, somewhere between dead center and out to the sides, and that's what helps them feel connected. If they were, if our guitars were fully left and fully right, well, they're going to have a real tough time getting together to make that wall of sound. Too much space between them. But they also impossibly sound like there is quite some distance to them. And I'm really curious how the producer went about doing this. It looks like Chelsea is the producer here also. It says Chelsea Wolfe and John Congleton, which is very fascinating. So she didn't master it, but it looks like she wrote it and produced it. Um, and I really don't know how to feel about it. Well, obviously I know how to feel about it. I get the emotion that she's going for here. I want to understand how it was created, honestly. It feels impossible to me. It feels contradictory. And, I've talked about before, when we come across these complex musical ideas, I tend to find ways to express what they were going for and how they might have achieved that, at least from my limited exposure to the song. But when it comes to production, I am constantly out of my out of my little pond. And things like this just might be a very standard idea. How to make it small and compressed, but have a little bit of width to it across the horizontal plane here. And I just don't have the experience with the production, but I do want to know how to do that, especially since, and this is just a little plug, I guess, this month is Heavy Music Month for the Composition Jam. All of our composers in the jam are tasked with writing a heavy song. Doesn't necessarily need to be metal, but it needs to portray weight of some sort. And yeah, this sounds like something I might play around with, a sound similar to this. And I kind of want to know how to do that. So if anybody has producer friends or if they're producers themselves and you hear this song, you're like, oh, duh, you just use this plugin and a little bit of that one and you toss a little bit of this in there. I would love to know. I really would. Um, and the last thing I think I want to discuss a little bit here before we get into the lyrics is the contrast between the heavy weight of the music and the soaring, what I called uh, ethereal vocals. Um, and not all the vocals are quite in that ethereal realm. I think it's mostly some of the secondary vocals that come in at times, but I think most of all, across the board, the vocals do stand in stark contrast to the heavy weightiness of the music, and I'm not quite sure what to make of it yet. I'm hoping the lyrics have something in there about this dichotomy. It could just be that this is Chelsea just being Chelsea, doesn't really have much of a choice, right? She has a higher vocal range. The music she wants to make is lower and grittier. There's going to be a natural gap. But I do think it's interesting that the vocals are primarily given a bit of a cleanliness to them. They are compressed a little bit to fit in, and we do have the one style that's just very wide and kind of overlaps and ripples within itself when notes get held out and kind of muddies that up a little bit. But the core vocal style is just very clean, and it, like I said, it stands in stark contrast to what the music's doing. Which is just heavy and gritty and unified, and it again. It's kind of a rock or pop style of production where the music sits under the vocals. The vocals are designed to be heard. Um, so yeah, like I said, hoping to kind of dig into a little bit of that on the lyrical side. Um, I think that's it. That's really all that I can think of. Um, it's probably something I should be talking about here, but I was just so enthralled by the atmosphere of the track that maybe I missed it. So yeah, let's get into some lyrics then. Verse 1 says, "Baby, they don't want you. They only want to tear you apart. They believe if they drink you, they'll be like you. It'll never end. The drag will keep on coming." Chorus says, "Dragged out in the weather, dragged out in the madness, dragged out in your loneliness." Verse 2 says, "Sometimes I want to lose my mind to lose myself. Sometimes I want to lose my mind and lose myself to something." Little variation on that there that changes the meaning of that. Lose myself to something, to someone else. Won't you take me down? I'm so tired. Dragged out in the weather, dragged out in the madness, dragged out in the loneliness. Yeah. I mean, what I get out of this is mostly, I can get some elements of stardom out of this. I don't know if Chelsea has ever had to battle with that. I don't know where she fits as far as being a big name. I've heard her name a few times through the process of doing this channel, but outside of this channel, I can't say I've ever heard it. So I don't know how big of a name she is, but um, I can definitely see a lot of these elements in somebody who has experienced that sort of popularity, where people don't want to be your friend or don't want to be around you for what you might be able to reciprocate in a standard relationship idea. So relationships are typically give and take, right? Most people aren't in a relationship just because they want to give things away. It's usually because they need something else as well. And that's kind of like a very functional view of relationships. Obviously, it's more complicated than that, but typically in a relationship, both people will end up giving a little and getting a little out of it. Um, but in these sort of parasitic relationships, like with stardom, um, the other person wants to be around the star, the popular person, for selfish reasons, right? Maybe they can get clout. Maybe they just want to be around the person that they idolize, right? Maybe they just want to be there when things go downhill, and maybe they can catch a little bit of, catch a little bit of money on the way down or something like that. Everything is self-serving though, and that's what this starts out. So they don't want you. They don't want your friendship. They don't want your companionship. They don't want to get to know you. They only want to tear you apart. They believe if they drink you, they'll be like you. And it never ends. The drag will keep on coming. So yeah, it's this idea that not everybody wants to be your friend for the relationship's sake. They all want to get something out of you. It says the drag will keep on coming. You'll be dragged out into the weather, into the madness, and into your own loneliness. And I think the loneliness one is an important aspect. The weather one, I'm not quite getting. It could mean a lot of different elements. But the madness is just about some of the paranoia that you could eventually come to when you realize that all the people around you are fake friends in it for themselves and you have no one, and that no one is the loneliness that's leaned into in this third line here. Then Chelsea implants herself into this situation. She becomes the one I think that people are wanting to tear into. So sometimes I want to lose my mind and lose myself. There's that madness aspect, and lose myself to something. The first one, I think it's interesting that she alludes to, separating from oneself to allow that aspect, maybe the popularity or the stardom or whatever, to be separated so you can exist outside of that, which I think we can see that kind of want in a lot of celebrities when they're kind of over that whole paparazzi vibe, right? Maybe when you're young and you're just hit your stride as far as popularity goes, and you're like, man, you got the paparazzi after me. People want a piece of me, like I'm famous. You kind of dig it, right? Maybe even ham it up for the cameras and stuff. But there's a point when you really just want your privacy back, and you're kind of over it, and you just want to separate that part of your life. But then to even change it up a little bit It says just to lose myself. Maybe to lose myself to something, or maybe to someone else. Won't you take me down? I'm so tired. And I think this is an interesting line because it could allude to a lot of stuff. But to me, it's a way of losing yourself, getting out of your body. And a lot of things can do that for people, right? Just to kind of take you out of your mind, to get you out of thinking about the future or your problems or your woes, and to get you to live in the present for a moment, to get out of your head, I think is the phrase a lot of people use. And this could mean anything from relationships to drugs to even just something like, binge watching media, just completely shutting your brain off and for like 8 hours straight watching a easily digestible television show. You really don't have to think about anything, and your problems can wait until later. And I think that's what she's going on here now is about destructive things that will take her down, as she states. But she's so tired that that sounds like a positive thing, opposed to dealing with these problems that are all around her, these people trying to get a piece of her. And I think it's interesting that verse 1 is don't be around these people because they'll drag you down, and verse 2 is I'm so tired, won't someone please drag me down? And I think, if nothing else, it's interesting that we can look at destructive patterns both in a positive and negative light, and even sometimes see them as a way of self medicating, when in other times it would be a red flag of an event or a friendship or whatever. Really interesting to see the dichotomy there. And of course, it's a very heavy topic, right? Um, I still don't know if it can be applied to anyone outside of stardom. I assume that there might be a metaphor here that works for something else, but for me, I'm reading it completely on the surface. Um, and that's how I'm taking it. But regardless, I think it's a heavy topic that works well with the heaviness and weight of the song. Not to mention the song on all occasions, every line in here is about being dragged down, and the music just being heavy and weighty and crushing and pushing and dragging the listener down fits so well with what they're trying to achieve. So, those are my thoughts on Chelsea Wolfe's Dragged Out. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this one or not. Anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct anything that I said, go ahead and let me know. I'll be sure to reply to anything like that. Above the comment section, if you could, head into the description box, and there's a link for Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here. My brain lagged out for a second. I was like, what does Linktree do? Takes you to this menu right here. You can pick up some merch, join the Patreon, join the Discord, submit your own special selections, follow me on Twitter, and a bunch of other stuff. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, we have a special selection coming up next. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we'll be checking out more Women of Rock as well as another special selection. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.